I came back when the snow fell, a story of sisters, silence, unfinished goodbyes, and the quiet kind of forgiveness that arrives without being asked. I came back in winter, the kind of winter that doesn't demand anything, the kind that slips in during the night and settles across rooftops and sidewalks without asking to be noticed. Snow had fallen lightly, like ash from something long burned out. It covered the pavement in a thin coat of silence. Cars moved slowly. People spoke in lowered voices, if at all. It had been 10 years since I last stepped off the train at this station. Still the same flickering sign. Still the same cracked vending machine by the exit. The kind of place that resists change, even as the world inches forward around it. The town itself was unchanged in the ways that mattered. The bakery on the corner still smelled like burnt flour and yeast. The hardware store still kept its lights too bright. The school bell still rang too late, a thin clang across rooftops. Even the wind felt the same, dry and cold, threading through gaps in coats and memories alike. I didn't come back for anyone, not at first. I told myself I came to clear out the house, to do what no one else would. It was something that could be written down as a task, scheduled, completed, and checked off. Something practical. But walking through the streets, past places that had once held meaning and now held only silence, I knew I wasn't here just for the house. The taxi stopped at the edge of the road. I told the driver I could walk the rest of the way. The house stood at the top of a small hill. It had always looked tired, even when we lived in it. The roof sagged slightly in the middle. The paint on the wood siding had chipped away in strips, exposing the gray underneath. A few brittle weeds curled up through cracks in the walkway, clinging to what warmth the stones still held. I unlocked the front door. The key turned the same way it used to. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and old fabric. Not quite dust, something softer. Her scent lingered in the corners, a mix of dried flowers and fabric softener. Familiar, faint. Her red shoes were still lined up by the door. I stood there a moment longer than I meant to. Nothing had moved. Her coat still hung by the stair rail. A stack of unopened mail sat on the small table near the entrance. In the kitchen, the calendar on the wall had been left on the month of March, 5 years ago. Days circled in pencil. Grocery lists are written on the side. Doctor's appointment. Dry cleaning. Nothing more than a routine. Nothing that told a story, except that she had intended to return to it. But she never did. She died on a wet road on a spring morning. That's what they told me. A curve slick with rain, a car she couldn't avoid. That was all. I didn't come for the funeral. I sent flowers with a card I didn't sign. I don't know who read it. I don't know if anyone cares. By then, I had already been gone too long. She was my twin. We shared everything except the parts we didn't speak of. It's strange how someone can be your mirror and still hold secrets from you. Maybe that's why mirrors are always cold. We grew up close. Everyone thought we were inseparable. But even as children, I knew we were not the same. She was the quiet one, always watching, always measuring. The one who remembered birthdays and called on weekends. She made herself smaller when the room grew tense. I grew louder. She stayed. I left. When he entered our lives, things shifted without anyone admitting they had. He was kind, gentle. The kind of man who took care with his words and even more with his silences. He was hers. That's what it looked like, what it was meant to be. But hearts don't always follow clean lines, and love doesn't always ask for permission. We were young and foolish, and whatever we were, it didn't last long enough to be called anything real. Or maybe it lasted too long to ever become something proper. She never asked me directly, never confronted me. Maybe she didn't want the answer. Maybe she already knew. They got married not long after I left. I received the invitation in an envelope addressed in her handwriting. I stared at it for an hour, then threw it away. That was 10 years ago. Now, 5 years since she died, I stood in the house that still held her shape. I walked through each room. Her bedroom was as tidy as I remembered. A scarf is still draped on the chair, a half-finished book on the nightstand, the mark of a page left too long. I found myself drawn to the windows, to the view of the garden behind the house. The soil had hardened. Dead stalks of something once green leaned against each other like bones. There was no color, just the pale hush of winter pressing down. We had a place we used to go to when we were girls. A cliff near the old lighthouse. It wasn't far from town, just past the edge of the woods, where the land dropped sharply toward the sea. It was the kind of place that felt forgotten. I went there again. The trail had narrowed over the years. Branches leaned low, brushing against my coat. The path felt familiar, though I hadn't walked it in a decade. The sea was gray. Thick clouds hung just above the horizon. The lighthouse looked smaller now, more fragile. Its red top is chipped, rust curling around the edges. I stepped toward the rocks near the edge and saw something tucked beneath a crack, wrapped in plastic. A notebook. Her handwriting is on the cover. I opened it carefully. Short entries, sparse thoughts, sometimes only a phrase. It wasn't a diary. More like a record of feeling. Written not for anyone, not even for herself, but to give shape to thoughts that might have otherwise disappeared. She wrote about him and me, and the way love could go quiet without ever going away. She never sounded bitter, just tired. She had known. Maybe not everything, but enough. I read for a while. Then I closed the notebook and tucked it back where I found it. I didn't need to take it with me. I already carried enough. Back in town, I saw familiar faces. Some looked away. Some stared too long. No one said anything. Their silence was its own kind of recognition. He lived a few streets away. I walked past his house on purpose. The curtains were closed. The porch is empty. I stood on the sidewalk across from his gate and watched the front door for a while. He came out to water the garden. Nothing grew there anymore, but he still poured water across the soil, slow and steady. A motion done out of habit, or maybe memory. He didn't see me, or if he did, he didn't show it. I walked away. It began to snow again that night, thin flakes, carried sideways by the wind. I sat by the window in the room we once shared and watched the world turn white. I hadn't meant to stay more than a few days. But time here didn't move in the same way. Hours folded in on themselves. The days stretched quietly, one into the next. I went on walks, visited places we had been as children. The swings are behind the school. The creek where we caught dragonflies in summer, all of them are smaller now, faded. Then came the accident, a patch of ice. My boots are slipping. My head hit the pavement. I woke up in the hospital. No one was there. The lights were too bright. The room smelled like rubbing alcohol and something bitter. My chest ached. My ribs throbbed when I breathed too deep. The nurse spoke softly, asked me questions, wrote things down. I stayed a few nights longer than needed, not for medical reasons, just because I wasn't sure where else to go. Something had shifted. It felt like waking inside someone else's memory, like I'd done all of this before. Not the accident, not the hospital, but the feeling, the quiet, the weight. The past pressed against me in new ways. When I was discharged, I didn't return to the house. I returned to the cliff. It was colder this time. The sea is darker. I stood near the same spot where I found her notebook, but didn't look for it again. I stood in silence. No thoughts, no decisions, just presence. Something about the stillness held me. There was nothing left to say, nothing to fix. But for the first time, I felt that was okay. The sea was still, as if it too had tired of pretending to move forward. A silver line stretched into the distance, with no waves, no wind, just that endless quiet where even your own breathing seems too loud. I returned to the cliff after a long night of dreaming. In the dream, I saw her again walking barefoot down the hallway of our childhood home, light trailing behind her like morning. But her face was blurred, soft at the edges. I followed her, but she never turned around. When I woke, the house was too warm, too full of air that didn't belong to me. I needed the opening. I needed something that could not be held. So I returned to the sea. The cliff was exactly the same as when I first came back. Nothing ever shifted here. Even the rocks, worn and smooth, felt unchanging beneath my shoes. I sat for a long time, not watching, just being watched. By memory, by absence. I could feel her in the air, not close but not far, not forgiving, not condemning, somewhere in between. I looked down at the path leading back to the lighthouse, thought of what it would be like to disappear. Not in the dramatic way people fear, but in the quiet way no one notices, a slow erasing. Like a name whispered into the wind, again and again, until it thins into nothing. Back in town, I walked to the cemetery again. Her grave was, as it had been, clean and minimal. The frost had melted, revealing damp soil around the edges. Still no flowers. I brought none. I had nothing to offer her, not now. She had already taken what I could never return. I knelt by the marker and placed my hand on the stone. Cold, solid, more honest than I had ever been. I thought of all the things I wanted to say, and how none of them mattered now. Forgiveness wasn't something you found. It was something you lost the chance to ask for. That evening, I walked past his house. The garden was bare. The porch light flickered, then went dark. He wasn't outside. The curtains were drawn. I could see only the faintest movement beyond the glass, someone moving in a room lit by one dim lamp. He hadn't remarried. They said he visited her grave every Sunday. I never saw him there. Maybe he went at dawn. Maybe he couldn't bear the afternoon light on her name. Maybe we both had our own hours for grief. The next day I woke early. I didn't plan to. It just happened. There was a strange stillness in my chest. Not pain, just emptiness. A hollowness that echoed when I breathed. I opened the window. Fog clung to the hills, softening every edge. Even the sound moved slower. Birds called once, then fell silent. I made tea, but didn't drink it. My fingers trembled slightly when I reached for the cup. A small, involuntary shake, the kind that happens when something in you lets go before the rest of you is ready. I took the train to the next town over, a place I had never been, just to move, just to put space between me and what I had started to feel again. The town was unremarkably quiet and plain, with narrow streets and faded awnings. But there was a lake, a small one, half frozen at the edges, a bench facing the water. I sat there all afternoon, coat wrapped tight around me, scarf pulled to my chin, watching the lake blur into the sky. No one passed by, just me, the bench, and the lake. The day folded into evening. I didn't move. For a moment I thought maybe this was how someone disappeared, not by choice, not by force, but by slowing down so gradually, so gently, that even the body forgets to protest. I didn't cry. I just sat there until the cold reached my bones. I returned home late. The lights in the house felt too bright. I turned them off and stood in the dark. I walked through the rooms once more, slowly. Each step is its own act of memory. In the kitchen, I opened the drawer where she kept the matches. Strike one. The flame flickered. Then he steadied. I lit a candle and placed it by the window. Its glow was small. It didn't chase away the shadows. It didn't warm the room. But it made the silence visible. In her room, the sheets were still folded. Her scarf still hung on the chair. I sat on the edge of her bed and rested my hands on my knees. Then I leaned forward and lowered my head. Just for a moment. I think I slept there without realizing. When I woke up, it was morning again, pale and cold. I stood up, smoothed the blanket, and left the room without looking back. 2 days later, I visited the cliff for the last time. The wind was stronger. The sea is no longer calm. Small waves broke in patterns like breathing. The lighthouse was barely visible through the mist. I brought nothing with me, not even a coat, just a thin sweater that didn't hold the cold out. I wanted to feel it. I needed to. The rocks were damp. The ground is unsteady. I stood close to the edge, close enough to hear the sea more clearly than my own thoughts. I closed my eyes. She came to me again, in the space between one breath and the next. Not in a vision, not in light, just a memory. Her laughter in the kitchen, her fingers brushing my arm, the way she used to sigh after long days, the weight of her absence pressed into me from all sides. For a moment, I leaned forward. Just slightly, just enough. But the wind shifted, and I stepped back, not because I changed my mind, but because something small inside me, something left over, still held on. I sat down. Let the cold sink into me. Let the grief settle again in its familiar place. A week later, I left the house. Not permanently, just for a while. I stayed in a small motel 2 towns over. Clean room, no decorations, no distractions. I stopped answering messages, stopped checking the calendar. I slept most of the day. I ate only when I remembered. People passed by in the hallway, but I never opened the door. Sometimes I forget what day it was. Other times, I remembered too clearly. One afternoon, I packed my bag, checked out of the room, and started walking. No plan, just streets and sidewalks, each one less familiar than the last. I sat in a park near a small bridge. The wind moved gently through the trees. A group of schoolchildren crossed the bridge, their voices trailing behind them like ribbons. I didn't look at them. I waited until the sun dipped behind the buildings. Then I stood up and walked in the opposite direction. I returned to the house late that night. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and knew it wouldn't be for long. There wasn't anything left to do. I had come back expecting some closure, maybe, understanding. What I found was that some things simply stop, like breath, like time, like a heart that forgets how to begin again. A few days later, they found me on the cliff, not gone, but not all are there either. Shoes soaked, fingernails dirtied by stone, eyes open. I hadn't fallen. But something in me had broken loose. They brought me back, to the hospital, then home. The doctor said I needed rest, said I had lost something and never let it go. He was right, but what I lost wasn't her. It was the part of me that left with her. I never left the house again after that, not in any real way. The rooms grew smaller, the windows are darker. The silence settled around me like dust, and I let it. I became a shape moving through stillness, not alive, not, just a present. One day at a time, until the days stopped too. They say grief gets lighter with time, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it stays, not as painful, but as a shadow on the wall that moves when you do, a breath that echoes after you stop speaking, a season that never really ends.